Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Let me welcome you all. This is a wonderful, distinguished panel. I know Marcus is not in yet, but very soon he'll be here. And I just want to welcome all of you on this very timely webinar. And I thank Rabbi Michael White for suggesting the topic today, When the World Shatters, Faith, Shared Love, Light the Way. Beautiful, Rabbi. Thank you so much for that. And this webinar is dedicated to George Floyd, who was murdered. Mr. Floyd is not unique. History tells us people like Rodney King, Abner Loima, Amadou Diallo, Sean Bell, Eric Garner, and Ahmed Aubrey of Georgia all died due to covert, overt, and systematic racism. You know, Mr. Floyd tested positive for COVID a few weeks before his death. But the reality is, Mr. Floyd died from a much more deadly disease, the pandemic of racism and discrimination. I was born and brought up in India. I love my secular and democratic country I loved. Now it is totally a different story. Muslims are being lynched to death. Christians are being targeted for practicing their faith. There are so many problems throughout the world. So let's strive to be anti-racism versus non-racist. Let's try to be anti-racism versus non-racist. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, preached and practiced anti-racism and inclusion. Just Google the last sermon of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and you will know what he was talking about 1400 years ago. I would like to announce that Islamic Center of Long Island is establishing a $1,000 scholarship in memory of George Floyd for Westbury High School students. Also, we know his neck was under the knee of the police officer for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. That is 526 seconds. Islam teaches us to respond to an evil with good. So the members of Islamic Center of Long Island will donate 526 non-perishable food boxes to the needy of Long Island. Again, I welcome you all and thank you so much for joining this afternoon. Now I give back to Sister Isma. Dr. Isma.
Thank you so much, Brother Habib. I would also like to welcome everybody. Thank you so much to our esteemed panelists, our guests who are in the wait room. And we are honored to do our civil duty of coming together in fellowship and in spirituality and address this issue with prayers and concrete thoughts. As is in the Islamic tradition, I'm going to start with a brief recitation of one of the short verses of the Quran, which basically guides us to stay on the path of righteousness. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. The egregious structural bias, social inequities, and racism has plagued our country for over centuries. Systemic racism includes policies and practices entrenched in established institutions, which result in exclusion or promotion of designated groups. We have virtually gathered here today to grieve yet another life which was brutally taken by blatant racism in our country. Mr. Floyd had to pay the ultimate price to shake us all out of a state of unconscionable apathy. Before we start with our panelists, I would like to thank Adrienne from Temple Sinai, Bashir, Javed, and Binesh from Islamic Center of Long Island for their technical support. We are on Facebook Live as well. If you go on ICLI website, you guys can see and hear us. I would start with our panelists. We have Leslie Davis. Thank you, Leslie, for joining us today from NAACP Westbury.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have Mufti Muhammad Farhan, the Executive Director of Islamic Center of Long Island. We have Father Gregory Renazizi, Interreligious Affairs, Catholic Diocese of Rockville Center. Thank you so much, Father Greg. We have Pastor Marcus Tillery, Community Church of East Williston, and Rabbi Michael White from Temple Sinai of Roslyn. So thank you so much all for being over here. I'm going to start. We're going to jump on the questions, and then in the waiting room, we have some of our elected officials who have joined to show their support and to join us in prayer today. So I will have them come in as after we address the first question. We get these horrific videos of brutal killings on our streets and in our neighborhoods. The individuals who are doing these crimes, criminal acts of violence, know that people are recording them. And it's really appalling to see those videos, and yet the blatant arrogance of the criminals who are doing these things with no fear of accountability. So I would like to address my panelists and request them to talk about how might religious communities respond to racial tensions in our society. I would request Rabbi Michael White to start, and then we will go ahead with the others.
Thank you, Dr. Chowdhury, and thank you to ICLI for hosting this important conversation. Thank you to all of our distinguished public officials who are joining us and from whom we'll hear shortly, and to my friends, our distinguished panelists as well. I think that for someone in my position as a white man of privilege, for me, the place to begin is with listening with an open heart. I think the people in my position need to be able to do that, to listen without defensiveness, to listen and understand that the people who are speaking to you, if they are willing, are offering their truths and offering their existential realities that, one, might be radically different from our own, and two, might challenge our assumptions about our community and about the institutions that guide our community. Yesterday at Temple Sinai, we had a wonderful and important conversation with a local pastor, the Reverend Victor Lewis of the Friendship Baptist Church in Roslyn, and he proceeded to tell us that every single one of his children has been racially profiled by the police, every single one of them. He told us about the young members of his church who walk into a Target and suddenly find themselves being followed by security people for no reason at all. He told us about the experiences of humiliation and alienation that children of color have experienced in our school district. And it was painful to hear, and it was painful for him to express. So painful that in the midst of the conversation, this veteran of the war in Iraq and this former pioneer of Wall Street literally fell into tears. We have to be willing to hear these things, and we have to be willing to hear them in a way that engenders trust, so that collectively we can do the very hard work of building the kind of community wherein everybody feels safe and valued and gains the justice to which every single citizen, every single person is entitled. So we begin with listening.
Thank you so much, Father Greg. If you can help us in this situation, lead us in and inspire us by your words and your prayers.
Again, I just want to echo everyone else as far as thanking them for being a part of this. To our civil leaders, religious leaders, I'm humbled to be part of this panel and to have been invited into this conversation, this all too important one. One of the things among a lot that has struck me over the past few days in the wake of Mr. Floyd's death, one thing that stood out to me was the reality, and I'm like Rabbi White, speaking as a white man, you come at this from a particular perspective, and there's sometimes a bit of fear in speaking because you don't want to say the wrong thing. You don't want to say something that's insensitive or perceived to be insensitive, even if that's not certainly your intention. But one of the things that stood out to me was, I'd heard this before. I remember a couple of years ago, probably because of another tragedy like Mr. Floyd's. And it was as parents, and even though I'm not a parent in the natural sense, parents have conversations with their children at different points in their lives about important lessons, whether it's about relationships or education or sexuality, raising their own family and such. And I was intrigued to hear that so many Black parents have to have a very unique conversation with their kids that my parents never had with me. And that is how you have to behave and act in certain situations, especially when you're with the police, if you're involved with the police, if you're stopped by police, or again, if you're in a store and you feel that you're being watched, how you behave and how you comport yourself, and using your manners and being sure your hands are visible, and all these things that are mind-boggling to me because I never had this conversation with my parents. But the one thing that has struck me is this can no longer be a conversation that only Black parents have with their Black children. We need to, all of us, be having more conversations like this with our children, with our congregations, with our constituents. We need to be having conversations explicitly about race, racism, sexism, all of these terrible isms that have so incredibly affected our society. Every family needs to be having these conversations. And again, I'll speak for myself as a pastor here in Port Jeff Station. The vast majority of my congregation are white families. That does not absolve us from the need to have this conversation. I've been in other congregations. I was down the block from ICLI at St. Bridges in Westbury, where everything happened in 4 languages with 6 ethnic groups, a very different reality. And that conversation when there was easier because it was part and parcel of our life. My point is this, and I know we're going to speak more about it, but is that this conversation has to be happening at the kitchen table, in the congregation hall, in Congress, everywhere. We have to give voice. And while there are demonstrations and all, and that is good, as long as they remain peaceful and keep that aim of changing things for the better, it can't end in a week or two when things seem to die down. This conversation has to continue. It has to become a standard among all families, big and small, religious and non-religious alike. We need to keep having this conversation and teaching all our kids how they behave and how they respect each other, no matter what line of work and what field they go into. This conversation has to be much more prevalent across the board.
Thank you so much. Leslie, I would like you to take it from here. You're in the community, you are our neighbor, and you are such an advocate for rights. So share your thoughts with us.
It's refreshing to hear that everybody has a perspective on really what's going on in their own lens. And what I believe others need to do is realize that other lens that they're not privy to, that they don't understand, that they don't feel, they need to really break down that barrier and put themselves in that lens. But realize that lens is no different from the way you feel about your lens. People need to view it like across the board, we're people, we're human. As an advocate, as a community leader, as a teacher to 11th and 12th graders, I don't see color, I see students with brains that I have to teach. And I feel that that's the lens that we need to adopt as a community. And that's a mindset and a heartfelt. You have to feel it inside. You have to put yourself into it. And I don't think people really do that. They say, oh, wow, I feel so bad. Why? Explain to me, express to me. Because until you can, and take that lens off that you've lived with all your life and put somebody else's lens in, then we could sit at the table together collectively. Because then we'd be able to hear each other's thoughts and feel each other's emotions and come together collaboratively to make a difference in this community.
Thank you so much for that perspective, Leslie. I'm going to invite Pastor Marcus Tillery. He's on the phone. That's why you can't see him. But Pastor Tillery, you have really been an advocate for minority communities and basically rights for all, but such an outstanding advocate. We would love to hear your thoughts. Marcus, you need to unmute yourself. Yeah, Marcus is connecting with audio. We'll just give him a second. While we're waiting for Marcus to get a connection, Mufti Farhan, you're involved with youth on Long Island. You're involved with various communities. What are your thoughts? How do we deal with it? What do we do? And after you, then Marcus, I'll ask Pastor Tillery to join. But please.
Sure. Greetings to all. Thank you for the esteemed panelists, Dr. Isma, Brother Habib, for hosting and making this possible. Our esteemed guests and panelists, and of course the attendees as well. Thank you all for joining virtually in the Islamic Center of Long Island, and we hope to see all of you in person soon. But ever since this entire thing, has come about, being a millennial, a person who was raised, I was raised in Brooklyn. I went to my school there, and of course my neighborhood, my friends, people I went to school with, and of course then I went to an Islamic institution to study. But this brings back a lot of deep thoughts and allows me to reflect of how we are raising a generation. It is important for us to have these open dialogues, these conversations, and more than that, knowing and trusting one another. As Leslie mentioned, that more than just people of colors, they are human beings, they're individuals, they're people with heart and feelings. And unfortunately, sometimes we live in a bias in a way that it just creates a sense of feeling from a very young age in our own homes. Racism, open or hidden, it exists, and we need to realize this. And it has to start from myself as an individual within my own home before pointing fingers at anyone else. Is that how am I dealing with this? Yes, our collective concern is to bring a better society, but I think as panelists and attendees, we really need to go back motivated with true pledges in our lives to really go back and reflect and see, how am I raising my children? How am I raising my family? Do I have conversations like that? As Father Greg mentioned, we need to have these conversations on tables, in congregations, at homes, with friends and loved ones. And I think a continuous discussion, and it hurts me that we come together and we talk about this only after losing innocent lives. But I think it has to become a part of our daily routine and truly caring and loving for one another. And I'll finish with this, and I of course will have much more detail, context detail as well, but reminds me and reflects me upon some of the last words of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the Prophet in Islam, where he delivered the last sermon, which was the largest sermon of his life, with the largest congregation of a month or so before he passed away. And openly, that sermon mentioned that no black has right over white, and no white has rights over black. No Arab has superiority over non-Arabs and Arabs over non-Arabs. And all of you are gifted and noble according to your piety and fear and consciousness of God. So I think it's so important for us to really talk about this. And I'm honored to be a part of this panel today and to share my thoughts. More than my words, I want to share my feelings today.
Thank you, Mufti Farhan. Thank you so much for those inspiring words. We have Pastor Tillery with us. Pastor Tillery, I know you had a little bit of an issue with the connection. Thank you so much for joining us. We welcome you as a panelist and as our esteemed guest. Could you please share your thoughts on what is our responsibility as a religious community, and how do we deal with this kind of desperate racism and blatant racism in our communities?
Well, thank you all. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, we can.
All right, very good, very good. I apologize for the difficulty. I'm not sure what's happening today, but I am honored to be here with you all. I thank you all, each of you, for what you've done to really highlight this issue and bring it forward. And so I don't feel like anything we're doing today puts me among strangers. I have seen you, known you, and fought with you before. And that's a testimony, I think, to what each of these institutions bring. I want to take an opportunity to really, if you look at the diversity of those who are protesting, if you look at the diversity among that, there seems to be something there that speaks to where this nation needs to go in terms of embracing struggle. We see so many voices in that group that are not prone to the same treatment that an African-American male or female might get. Yet their voices are just as high and loud and boisterous as anybody else's. And I believe there's a signpost in that for so many in this nation who have remained quiet, who have remained on the sidelines, who have not really gone to the trenches because it was not an issue that affected them. There is a signpost in the number of people from different and varying diverse groups that are there representing the struggle that many feel might be compartmentalized and placed on African Americans because of the long history that's there. But if we're going to ever get beyond that, it's going to take the signpost that we see there, everybody taking a stake in this righteous movement on behalf of, yes, Black men who have been unfairly targeted and murdered. But just like the post that we see when so many of the young folk there, and not just young folk, but all folk, there is a sign in that for all of us. We must embrace it with the fervor that each of them have, not just leaving it to one group, but working as this coalition has across the board to address it as a community.
Thank you so much, Pastor Tillery. Yes, it's thought-provoking, and I'm glad we are here as we are together as one community to grieve together. It's good that along with offering our thoughts and sharing our grief, we are also talking about steps forward. So thank you so much for that inspiration that each one of you shared. I would request Adrienne and Bashir to kindly have our dignitaries in. We have Congressman Swazi, we have Senator Anna Kaplan, we have District Attorney Madeline Singas, we have Mayor of Westbury, Peter Cavallaro, who has been a huge, huge support and a voice for all communities. So if we can have our elected officials in, and let's hear words of support and inspiration from them.
So Dr. Chowdhury, Bashir is going to need to do that because I don't have the capacity to do that right now. But here you go. Okay,
yes,
there you
he's
go.
absolutely is on it. So we have Mayor Cavallaro. Mayor, you'll have to unmute yourself.
Hey, how are you, Dr. Chowdhury? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
So first, I'd like to say, as the mayor of Westbury, I'd like to virtually welcome everybody to the webinar. As everybody knows, the Islamic Center is in Westbury, and we're proud of that fact. As we're also proud that Father Greg was stationed here for some period of time, and the good work that he does. And I just want to give a shout out to Father Greg for all the work that he does. And obviously, we work very closely with Leslie Davis, who does a terrific job with the NAACP, as well as you all at the Islamic Center. Westbury is one of the most diverse communities on Long Island, and I have the privilege of being the mayor, and it really saddens me to see what happened not only in this instance, obviously, but repeatedly, in recent years, and frankly for much of our history. And it pains me to hear the things that are said by my residents, who are of color and who see this directly and who this impacts more directly. I think it's really important that the Islamic Center has put this webinar together, because I think, as a government official, and I'm sure some of the other government officials who may talk, we don't always talk about religion because sometimes we're afraid to talk about religion, but the topic of this webinar, I think, is extremely important, because what happened to that young man was an act of soullessness, really. And, the soul is the province of God. And that we need to bring religion back in an appropriate way into the public forum, because I think that's the thing that gives peace. And I think that unfortunately, it seems that we don't have as big of a compass as we should have. So I just want to thank you for doing this, and look forward to hearing the panelists this further.
Thank you so much, Mayor. And we are joined by Congressman Swazi. Thank you so much for your time, Congressman. You have always been with the communities and supporting various communities and people from all traditions. Please say a few words and share your thoughts with us.
Well, thank you so much, Isma, and thank you all for doing this. It's so important that you're doing it, and we're so grateful to you. George Floyd was murdered, and we need to hold the law enforcement officials accountable. But there is, as many of the faith traditions would say, out of the chaos can come a blessing. And from this chaos, we see people coming together in ways that we haven't seen before, I believe. And racism is a very real thing that we've had in our country since its very beginning. Before it was even America, racism was prevalent here. And now we need to figure out how to work together to move forward in real concrete terms, not just protests, not just speeches, not just the thoughts and prayers, but actually legislation and action to actually help address a real problem, a systemic problem that we have in our country, not just with law enforcement, with income inequality, with housing, with education. We all know too well here on Long Island about the segregation that exists, the unequal results in our school districts, the housing discrimination that was reported by Newsday that we all know about this past summer. I was on a conference call this week with all the Democrats in the House of Representatives, and John Lewis came on. He's been very sick, and I consider John Lewis. I hope he considers me. I think he does, a friend. I serve on his committee, where he's the chairman of one of my Ways and Means committees. We went to Selma, Alabama, right before the whole coronavirus really took hold in the beginning of March. And, walked over the Edmund Pettus Bridge and went to all kinds of seminars and learned so much about the civil rights movement. And he said the other day on the phone to everyone, he says, he never expected things to be as bad as they are today, as they are now. And he's been thinking about it, and he's been praying about it, and he's been crying. And he says, but he still has complete faith that we can do this. And he's inspired by seeing the diversity of the people protesting, and that we can't lose heart or lose faith, and we just need to keep moving forward. I posted a video on my Facebook the other day, a TED Talk that a gentleman gave from a police foundation. And he talked about how solving racism has always been a necessary thing. This video is from before everything exploded recently. He said, solving racism has always been necessary, but we've all who cared about it always kind of felt it was impossible. And what we need, and he specifically worked on the area of using data to try and change behavior. So the police use data in the thing called CompStat to monitor crime. We need to monitor the behavior of police in use of force. Where do they use it? What communities do they use it in? What is it, persons of color? And we all know it is, but we need to have data that drives it, and then have the police use that data to drive down the bad behavior and increase the good behavior. Anyway, there's so much we can do. I'm working on it with my colleagues. I'm hoping that we're going to be doing something in the next couple of weeks that shows that we're moving forward. I spoke to one of my colleagues a couple of days ago, Hakeem Jeffries, who's the leader of the Democratic Caucus, very good friend of mine, and said, just tell me which bills we have to work on and which ones we need to get through, and I'll do everything I can to help you. Anyway, so thank you so much for doing this. We can make progress step by step, piece by piece. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a lot of time, but we have to begin. So thanks for doing this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congressman Swazi, and keep working for us. We need to address this scourge of racism at an institutional level with policies in place, accountabilities, and thank you so much for working on these serious issues. I would now thank you. I would now like to have Supervisor Town of North Hempstead, Judy Bosworth, and then we would love to hear from our District Attorney, Madeline Singus. So Supervisor Bosworth, thank you so much for joining us.
Okay. Thank you, Isma, and just a big thank you to ICLI and all the distinguished panelists that are with us today, and those that have already spoken. We're here to honor the memory of George Floyd. And I think of all the times that I've been to the Islamic Center for wonderful celebrations, but too often for talking about dealing with acts of prejudice, acts of racism, acts of bigotry, and now this murder of George Floyd just brings it all together. It's the latest in a horrific line of senseless killings. It's unacceptable. It's heart-wrenching, and it makes you ask, finally, when do we say enough is enough? And I think now is the time. It's been the time for so long, but it brings it to the forefront. Enough is enough. And we, as a community, as a state, as a country, we have to do better. We're not doing enough. We need to, and we can say, oh, it needs to happen at the federal level. It needs to happen at the state level. You know what? It needs to happen at the local level. It needs to happen right here. We need to work together to end systemic racism. And that's why I'm so pleased to see Leslie Davis, who I know works tirelessly every day to address these issues. And as much as we work, there's so much more work to be done. We know that we can't remain silent to hate, intolerance, violence. In the town, we have the Not in Our Town initiative. And we've spoken about it so much, and we actually have developed a new sign because of this horrific incident. And I'd actually like to hold it up. I don't know if you guys can see it. You can see it a little bit, maybe. I'll read it to you. It says, "Not in our town. We pledge to not remain silent to hate, intolerance, or violence." And then underneath it, it says, "Enough is enough." And those words really came from an article that I had read in Newsday. And it was quoting Bishop Lionel Harvey and the sermon that he gave that was so touching. And that phrase was reiterated again and again: enough is enough. And I actually called the bishop and I asked him, I'd like to use these words, but I want your blessings to do it, which he gave us, because it's so important. We need to be doing this together. We need to be feeling it together. I spoke to someone who I care about very much. And she said, you don't know what it's like when your husband leaves, your son leaves, a loved one leaves the house, and you worry every day, are they going to be all right? Are they going to come home? This can't go on. We need to find ways. We're a family. We need to love and respect each other. We need to stand together in solidarity and pledge that this will not continue, that enough is enough.
Thank you so much, Judy. You have stood in ICLI's courtyard and supported ICLI's vigils for social justice. And actually, each one of you over here has been a part of Islamic Center of Long Island's family and fellowship. So thank you so much for those words. We have District Attorney Madeline Singas, and then Senator Anna Kaplan has joined us as well. Thank you so much, Senator. So if we can unmute DA. It doesn't sound.
Yes, hi.
Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chowdhury.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much. Yes, and thank you to ICLI. Like everyone here and most people who saw what happened to George Floyd, I was shocked and horrified. A life extinguished at the hands of a person who's entrusted to save lives, a person who was entrusted to protect, and instead that person took the life of a man who was so vulnerable, and we all watched it in real time, and that is shocking to me. It was absolutely shocking as a human being, as a mother of 2 teenagers, and as the district attorney. And it is a call to action for all of us to do better, for all of us to do better in our roles, in our official capacities, and as human beings, because as I watched that, I couldn't help but think, like, when did we stop treating human beings with dignity and respect? And where has that gone in our communities? So it's especially fitting that all of you as faith leaders lead these discussions, because it is at times when we feel the most grief, when we are at our most sad, when we feel that there's not so much that we can do, that we turn to our faith leaders. And I'm so proud of our faith leaders here in the county who take up the mantle and do the hard work. And I am confident will lead us and will stand with us as we do the examination that we have to do of our institutions and of ourselves. So I'm proud to stand with you. And as the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of this county, I'm prepared to do the work along with the people that I work with to make sure that our institution is not one of the institutions that contributes to the racism and the misery of so many people. When I saw that video, I said, that's why I became a prosecutor, to protect the vulnerable, to make sure that the George Floyds, I can protect them and hold accountable the people who would do that to them. That's why I became a prosecutor, and we're committed to keeping the vulnerable amongst us safe and to holding those who would hurt them accountable, no matter who they are. But we're also committed to doing the difficult work of examining the institution of the district attorney's office, the institution of the police departments that we work with, to make sure that we are doing our best, that we are embracing our humanity and the dignity of the people that we serve. And it's difficult work, but I'm committed to do it. And I'll ask all of you to hold me accountable so that we can get through this time. And like Pastor Tillery said, seeing the thousands of people marching and protesting and holding up signs, the very, very young to the very old, all races, all ages, is inspiring to me. And I think it's inspiring to all of us. That's going on in our county, that's going on across the world. And I think it is a time for change. And I'm confident that we can do better. We must do better. We must listen. We must hear the voices of the oppressed. Those stories must be shared with us so that we can have a better understanding and so that we can do better. So again, thank you for having me on. It is my honor to work with all of you as we get through this difficult time and move toward the future.
Thank you so much, District Attorney Senghis. And thank you so much. Basically, all of you have put together faith-based councils. I know the supervisor has done that. I know you have put together 2 councils, one for the community representatives, which is headed by Assistant DA Joyce Smith, and for the faith leaders, which is headed by Assistant DA Sylvia Finkelstein. And both platforms have given a tremendous support for all the faith leaders and the faith communities and the non-faith communities as well. So thank you so much for those initiatives. And I know Senator Kaplan has done the same. So has Congressman Swazi and Supervisor Bosworth. So we are joined by Senator Kaplan. Thank you so much. I know you were extremely busy, like all of you are busy, and it's heartwarming for the community. We have over 200 people watching this, and this is recorded as well. And it's great to see amongst the faith leaders, our elected officials who really support us and have come out in the strongest possible way to ensure change. So I thank you all. Senator Kaplan, you're on.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Chaudhry. Thank you for allowing me to take part in this forum. And thank you for holding this forum. I want to say I'm privileged and honored to be with you and all the people on this panel. I think my message is exactly the same. I find it a very, very difficult time right now for all of us that are going through this. It's almost unbelievable to experience what we are experiencing in the year 2020 in United States of America. As a political refugee who came to this country for the freedom and the rights that are given to everyone, and to see what is going on, and to see a life be taken away by force by our police officers, and just like the DA said, people who were there to protect us, has been very hard to deal with. I share the frustration, I share the anger with a lot of my constituents, and I stand with the people who rally and who've held all these different rallies in peace to get their message out, to make sure that we hear their voices, that we hear their message. And I agree, I think we elected need to be held responsible. We need to hear from our constituents and do what is right. And also, I really want to thank all the faith leaders for coming on board and wanting to get this message. How we are always taught by the Holy Bible that we should treat everyone with dignity and respect. We should treat people the way we want them to treat us. It is time for us to really take a look and really make changes. and make sure that in this great country, everyone feels safe. There's no reason for any mother or a sister or a father to feel anxious every time their loved one is walking out of their home. I'm committed to this. I can tell you this afternoon, I was in a conference with my Senate colleagues, with my leader. We've talked about a lot of different legislation that we are working very hard, try to push forward to do our part in state of New York. But it is not something that we can do alone. It is not something that we can do overnight. It's going to take every single one of us, elected, non-elected, all the people that call this great country home, to come together, unite, work together, and help each other. I think this country has always stood for these great bases, and that's why everybody wants to come to this country. And I think together, when we pull together, there's nothing that we can't do. And I'm really looking forward to working with all of you and making a difference. And thank you. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Senator Kaplan. We had Bishop Harvey. I don't know if he left, or if Bashir and Adrian, if you guys can get him back in the panel room, that would be great. Thank you so much. While we are trying to get Bishop Harvey, we are joined in by our Nassau County Controller, Jack Schneerman. Thank you so much, Controller, for joining us and standing in solidarity with all people, basically. And this is the time there is no us and them. And your time and your commitment to doing the right thing really encourages us and supports the people in the faith communities and the non-faith communities. So I thank you again, all of you, for standing with us and making sure we are all committed and we are all leading towards a better society where nobody is worried about their dark-colored skin and have going out in a street in the evening or just living. So thank you so much, Comptroller Schneerman. Thank you so much. You're on.
Thank you, and thank you again for hosting this and for bringing people together in this very difficult moment. It really is a testament to how important ICLI is to Long Island, that we're able to do these things together, and you're always able to step up in these difficult times. And so I think that means a lot. I'll just speak personally for a moment. For me, I'll just say that, for so many, the video of the end of George Floyd's life was so difficult to watch, and yet I think important for all of us to watch. I mean, the idea that this can go on in 2020 is shocking and unconscionable, and yet I think we realize that these things have been going on. A difference now is that we have the technology and therefore the transparency to show it and to help, drive the need for reform with that. And there's so many other incidents that we've not yet healed from, but this has clearly crystallized, I think, a need in our country to see some real reform. And for that, I am hopeful. And I'm hopeful for the safety of all those that are out protesting and making sure and working with our police to keep not only those protesting safe, but the police safe and everybody safe from the pandemic that we're still experiencing. And I know that looking at these inequities, we've got some work to do, and we have some work to do right here on Long Island. I mean, last year, we saw Newsday put out a piece on housing and the racial inequality there, and that gap. I've now put out 2 years in a row a series of reports on the equity gaps that we see here on Long Island. If you haven't had a chance, check them out as a quick plug for them. But we have the numbers are startling. We have a gap when it comes to dealing with COVID-19, a gap when it comes to housing, to healthcare, to education, and so many other things. And we have an economic gap, and that economic gap as we come out of COVID is from a racial perspective and a moral perspective is absolutely critical because communities are hurting and we have to make sure that we take care of people and that's so critical. So we have a lot of work to do, but whenever we come together at ICLA, I'm a little hopeful that we will do that work together, and I thank you for all that you're doing. It's a very healing thing for all of us to come together and have this conversation.
Thank you so much. I would also like to acknowledge Deputy County Executive Kyle Rose Lauder. She joined us, and she had to get something done, and she's going to hop back, and as soon as she comes, I'm going to have her come in and say a few words. We are also joined by Executive Director, Office of Asian Affairs, and board member of Women's Diversity Network, Ms. Farah Mozawala. Thank you so much, Farah, for the tremendous work that you're doing in Nassau County. We really want to thank you, and you're helping a lot of minority communities, especially during the COVID time, and especially now bringing all of us together. Thank you so much for your presence. We are also joined by Mr. Bobby Colotti. He's the chairman, Nassau County Human Rights Commission. And let's see. So Bashir and Adrian, please have our political officials and public officials as they come in to join us with their words of inspiration and support. That would be great. Moving on with our panelists, and I would request everybody to please mute themselves, including myself after I'm done. So we have a lot of questions about the role of faith-based leaders. How do we inspire hope? What do we do? So how do we address individual racism, which we all know leads to legal discrimination? So the steps to getting to institutional racism starts from individual racism. And we are all aware of that within our communities, within ourselves, and we are all responsible for it. What do we need to do now? How do you think individual citizens what can we do to make a difference? White, black, brown, doesn't matter. How do we come together and get rid of them and us? I would request Father Greg and Mufti Farhan to lead, and of course, everybody can join in later.
Thank you, Dr. Chaudhry. You know, right now, obviously, everything that's happening in the wake of the death of George Floyd is also against the backdrop of COVID-19, which has been dominating the headlines for months, and now over the past several days has taken a backseat to this great injustice that we've all sadly been witness to. So I'd like to actually, when I think about this, about your question of racism and race relations in our nation and in our communities, I want to take a page actually from our conversation about COVID, and I'll hopefully be able to make this metaphor work. You know, we talk about trying to get back to normal. We have these phases that we have to go through in order to you know, be able to get back to where the things we enjoyed. But we also recognize there's going to be a new normal, just as there was a new normal after 9/11 with travel. You know, things that we do now when we go through airports that were unthinkable 20 years ago. You know, removing your shoes, having such tight inspections and things like that. But that's now part of the new normal. We expect that because we know these sorts of things make us safe. So too, when we get back to a normal, it'll be new for us in the wake of COVID, because we're going to be much more mindful about cleanliness and germs and all that sort of stuff. George Floyd cannot be an event, cannot be a person, a life that we hear, we see, we grieve, we march, we demonstrate, we have panels like this, and then we return to normal. It can't be that. There has to be a new normal. And sadly, it's taken life after life after life for us to remember this. We cannot return to a normalcy that we once knew. It's got to be new. One thing to be specific is I think all of us, elected officials, and especially us faith-based leaders, pastors, rabbis, priests, all of us, we need to be challenging ourselves and our people, our congregations, to get more educated. Apathy cannot exist anymore. We have to be making strong, deliberate choices to learn more, because the more we learn, the more we're able to grow in a relationship with other people. And the more we learn, in some cases, the angrier we'll get that there's an injustice here or there. We need to be better educated about public policy. We need to be educated about police. And I'm a strong advocate of the good work that the majority of police do. I think the majority of them are well-intentioned. Are there systemic problems among police? Undeniably. But we have to get educated about all of these issues. We who are voters, we who are constituents, we who are members of faith communities, we have a responsibility to each other to get educated, to learn about advocacy programs. We cannot have apathy anymore. We have to get involved, and this has to be, as I said earlier at the outset of this forum, this has to be an ongoing conversation that cannot happen every now and then, but has to be interwoven in everything that we do.
Great, thank you so much, Mufti Farhan, and then Rabbi White. I would like you guys to lead this forward, and then everybody can join in. Mufti Sahab.
Sure, Jazakallah, thank you so much. And as Father Greg mentioned, I'm just going to take it from there, as he very beautifully put. And I think it's the question being, what are the citizens or individual people have to do now to live a life that is, different from what we have seen previously? And I really believe that as a nation, as individuals, as people, even household and communities, we need to make new commitments and new pledges and new vows and new commitments within our own selves, within our own families and our own communities, and within our own areas that we live in, to make sure that we are accepting and loving and caring for one another. It reminds me of the beautiful saying of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that none of you can be believers until you do not love for others what you love for yourself. Meaning, how can I complete myself or perfect myself as a believing man or believing woman, if I do not care or love for others what I love for my own self, right? Sometimes it scares me as being a father of 3 little ones, 8, 5, and 4, seeing them grow up in my own eyes and seeing them walk in the streets and not being discriminated or being pushed around or being called names. I really believe, and this is one of my biggest concerns that I feel, is that there has to be a narrative change in the minds of people, because narratives are things which create policies, and those are the things which create actions. For many of us, we worry about the actions, but we don't even worry about the policies or the narratives that have led to those actions. So we as a community, as every single person, politicians, elected officials, faith-based leaders, people who have joined us, I really believe that we all need to collectively work together to rectify and correct a nice and pure narrative of human beings. Take away the colors, take away the race, and put a narrative of a human being in front of us and move forward. And I hope that once we correct the narratives, our policies and our actions will also become beautiful.
Rabbi White, thank you, Mufti Saab. You're giving us a formula. I think today we are going to come up with concrete formulas. I hope so, and I pray. Rabbi White.
So I've been listening, and I'm coming to the conclusion that my personal opinion and preconceived notions surrounding race, particularly surrounding what people of color live through day by day, that my personal ideas about that are the least important in this conversation. I felt the same way, Isma, when we gathered right after the last presidential election, and we were so deeply concerned about what was going to happen to new immigrants in our community, given the rhetoric that had been spewed, the awful rhetoric during the last presidential campaign. And the Islamic Center gave us all a gift as a community. They brought all of us together so that we could really hear the stories and see the anguish and the fear in the eyes of the people whose lived realities are so painful. I don't think that anybody actually believes that they are a racist. I don't think that people, I think people believe that their conduct and their ideas and what they say is not remotely racist. And yet here we are. Part of the problem on Long Island is obviously how balkanized we are. How you can literally live your whole life here and not come into contact with someone who doesn't look just like you or live just like you. And so I think for me, what is most important is to hear the lived realities of the people who are suffering through this. Because I have come to see in my conversations with people I know and love that the problem is just so much more pervasive and entrenched. It's like a miasma, it's like a cancer. And that's why we have these events, and then we all gather and we all say the things that need to be said, but we don't really move the marker toward a better reality. So the last thing I'll say is that I think we need to work together to change policies and to change the balance of power away from the entrenched realities and the power centers that inadvertently or explicitly perpetuate the racism that leads to the misery and the deaths and the humiliations, the day-to-day humiliations that so many among us experience. I think we have to gather to do that work, the work of putting into place the legal protections so that people don't have to fear when they leave their houses or when their kids get into their cars or when they walk into stores, that they're not going to come out whole. So that's what I want to recommend, that we continue to gather and listen, and then we protect each other and we protect the people who need protection the most by advocating for policies and stripping away power from the institutions and the people that continue to threaten our neighbors.
That's thank you so much. That's so insightful and forward moving. I would also request Pastor Tillery and Leslie to share your thoughts on this question as well. Leslie and then Marcus, please.
I'm just going to piggyback on just a few things that I heard. Yes, we all do need to come together and know we don't look at things the same way. And I'm listening about the unity and about the fact that we're holding this forum, which is fabulous, and we're all together and we're listening. And there's only one missing component, and that's the person that lives it. And that's the key. To be, as you're open enough to hear everybody else's views and thought process and process it and try to feel it. But we're talking about something else that's not present in this forum. So I think that would be the beginning, that when you sit at a table and you have these meetings before the actual meeting, you include the people that are actually living the experience.
Great thoughts, Leslie. Thank you. Pastor Tillery, you'll have to unmute. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you so much.
Good. I would echo what the sister has said, Sister Davis, 100%. That, you know, so many of the people that operate under this every day are not at the table, are not heard, are not even spoken to. Many of them we didn't even consider before we realized they had to go to work and they became essential. And yet they suffer most of the deaths from the virus. Beyond this, will they be essential? Will we find it necessary, according to all the great doctrines that we live by, to be institutions of social justice for the widows and the orphans? Will we have them at the table? I can't say enough how much I appreciate the sister raising that point, and also what Brother Mufti has raised, the narratives. A lot of times we shape a narrative or a story around a group of people and we live by that. And so, no, we don't consider it racist. Absolutely not. For the narrative defends my narrow position. Even in Christianity, look at the narratives that shaped the beginning of this great faith. Look at how it cast so many into hell, regardless of anything. We have to challenge those narratives, and we have to have the people at the table who are so affected. For truly, they are essential to this conversation and to our future. And they were that long before COVID-19.
Great. Thank you so much, Pastor Tillery. Before we move on to some more conversation on the same topic, but really focusing now on what do we as faith-based communities and citizens want from our elected officials, and they're all in the waiting room so they can hear us, and when we start our conversation on that. Before we move on to that topic, I would like to acknowledge a few dignitaries, our support people who have supported us in various capacities as faith-based leaders, as community leaders, and I would like to acknowledge them and thank them for their support and for joining us this afternoon. We have with us Gyani Sarbijit Singhji. Thank you so much for joining us. We are indeed honored to have you, and we're looking forward to more events with you. I would also like to acknowledge Rabbi Jason Fruitlander from Woodbury Jewish Center, Rabbi Jay Weinstein, Congregation Shenach Halef, Rabbi Judy Rosenberg from Temple Or Elohim, and Rabbi Jay Rosenbaum from Temple Israel of Florence. Also, legislator Arnie Drucker, he was in and then he had to leave, so he's going to join us a little later. A young man who has provided so much support to the community, Ahmad Sheikh. He represents the young folks from South Asian Sports and Halal Guide and Muslims of Long Island. Thank you so much, Ahmad, for all that you do for the community. Jensen, board member of Office of Asian Affairs, and Mr. Zhang, who's also a board member of Office of Asian Affairs. We are also joined by Rabbi Art Vernon. Thank you so much, Rabbi, for joining us today and for showing support and standing with the communities and offering your inspiration. Moving on to the next as part of the conversation, within the context of racial and historical and cultural conditions that our country have seen and dealt with for for a very long time, we have witnessed that the interplay of policies, practices, and programs by the institutions that basically run this country. And those institutions, the policies that they have led to disparities of practice and disproportionate outcomes. I would like you guys to talk about what do you think or what would you like to see our elected official do now to deal with this systemic racism? I would have Leslie lead this, and Pastor Tillery and Rabbi White. Thank you, Leslie.
Okay. The biggest thing I noticed probably through the past 3 months was the COVID-19 epidemic. And it was so disproportionate. I mean, the numbers were so different in the communities of Black and Brown human beings. And then you looked at other communities and the numbers were low. And I looked at this during the regular, we discussed it as a unit, the NAACP. And, we feel like we should get more support, let's just say, can we get equal support, not more? Can we be at the table? I'm going to coin that phrase. Can we have a seat at the table? And I'm not saying that in a negative way. I'm saying it as if we had the same resources as other communities, maybe we would be able to have a better healthcare system or more amenities offered to the people on this side of the North Shore. We're all under the same jurisdiction, but we never get that same seat. So, I hope through this whole process that people begin to see that we could be proactive, preventative. Just think about it as if we were one of you. That's it. And I'm talking about as a culture and as a people. So.
Great, Leslie. Thank you so much. Indeed, we do see so many disparities at an institutional level, housing, of course, where we live and play, that determines our health, our finances. We see food insecurity around us. We see housing disparity. So, and all these factors do play in how we live. So, thank you so much for addressing this issue, Pastor Tillery, and then Rabbi White.
Absolutely. I have the great honor and privilege of living in a district represented by Senator Anna Kaplan. And so long before this, she had called us together to talk about issues that affected the African American community. That before we came to this great tragedy, Judy Bosworth was talking about things that needed to be rooted out of our community, not in my backyard, not in our town. And so what I find is an opportunity to voice the situations that we live under, to carry that directly to people who are not overly concerned about how many votes they're going to get, to people who are bound by justice and righteousness beyond an election term, beyond who's going to like them or not like them on the Senate floor. And until those people who are in our communities are represented across the board by justice and righteousness in those people who represent them, irrespective of what a vote or re-election might look like, to do the right thing. If you don't have a single minority, what is the right thing for the community there relative to who we are and how we live? We've been living in a situation of healthcare disparity. And so when COVID came upon us, who was on the front line? The same people who live under a healthcare disparity, certainly they're going to be affected more. Long before we come to George Floyd, Tamir Rice, Sandra Bland, the list goes on and on. There had to be elected officials who spoke to that before we get a victim. Many come on and speak of the racism being a part of the American fabric. Absolutely. Yes, it is, without a doubt. Each one of us face that and know that. And yet, there is George Floyd, Tamir, Sandra, and the list goes on and on. Surely enough is enough. But that message must be heard above re-election. That message must be carried along with justice and righteousness for all.
Thank you so much, Pastor Tillery. Rabbi White.
Just very briefly, I just want to reflect on what we just heard from Marcus and Leslie. I see Laura Curran is here, so I think it's amazing that all of our elected officials are here, and we are led by extraordinary elected leaders. I am grateful to all of them. And I respect all of them. I am proud to live in a community that is led by them. And yet, we heard what we just heard from Leslie and from Marcus about just the extraordinary disparity between the gifted leadership that we have and the lived reality on the ground, and the disparities that are very real and that seem entrenched. And so, there's a statement in the Torah. When the Torah when the Hebrew Bible and the first 5 books, what we Jews call the Torah, exhorts us to fight for justice, the commandment is justice, justice shall you pursue. The word justice is repeated. It's said twice. And so there's a lot of rabbinic commentary about this. The most dominant thread says that's because justice is so important. But another thread says that's because you probably didn't hear it the first time. And maybe we're just not hearing it the way we need to collectively come together and to really begin the work of eradicating these horrific injustices that cause some of our neighbors to get sicker faster, to not have access to the health care that they need, to have to live with this sense of alienation and fear, while others of us don't. It's not right. It's not just. We've all known that it's there and it's very real. We have wonderful elected officials who are committed to eradicating it. I just think we've got to double down and come together and do the hard work. And that's what I'm committed to.
Thank you, Rabbi White. Before I welcome the county executive, I would like to invite Mufti Farhan. Please give your views. What do you want? What kind of a change do you want to see? And what kind of policies do you want this change to bring? And what do you want from our elected officials?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Isma. As we had mentioned previously when we were talking about the issues related to how regular citizens can become a part of betterment of the society, and we talked about a proper narrative which leads to proper policies which lead to proper actions. And as collective citizens, we really need to work upon having the proper narrative. I would also say that that also goes very hand in hand with our government officials as well. That's the question of how do we sort of, collectively work with our elected officials and government officials to make sure that the places where we're living in is as safe for every individual and any individual, despite of your color, your race, your religion, the way that you dress. It has to be a place of safety for each and every person. And I think that the place that we live in, Nassau County, has done a great job, but we can always do better as individuals. I always get inspired by the teaching of the Prophet Muhammad, who said that a true believer always enhances their goodness every day, right? You don't stay still in your goodness. Your characters, your morals, your ethics, your goodness has to increase every single day to become a better individual. because you're facing new challenges every single day of your life. So I would say that we are diverse, but we need to see more diversity on the faces of Nassau County or the government or United States or New York State itself, where people feel and become accustomed to seeing faces and feel, you know what? I feel comfortable. I'm going to say a quick personal story. I had this neighbor of mine. She recently passed away, God rest her soul in peace. And she was actually a wife of a fireman who passed away, and she passed away in her 80s. And, she loved us dearly because I grew up in this area and my children as well. So in the very beginning, she was kind of very reluctant and wouldn't be very comfortable in speaking to me. But one day she actually saw a paper, a news day where I actually gave a talk with her priest and the rabbi. So she saw my picture and she's like, oh, you were on the paper with my rabbi and with my priest. And you know what? You are like us. She gave me a big hug. She was an elderly lady, late 80s. She recently passed away. And from there, we would take care of her, bring her food and things. But it just allows them to feel that, you know what? These people are also part of us. So I think Nassau County has done an amazing job, but we can still move forward with having more inclusiveness, more faces, which makes more people relevant. And as Leslie mentioned so beautifully, being on that table and being able to get the voice and our feelings and our thoughts out to others.
Thank you so much, Mufti Sahab. I would like to invite our County Executive, Laura Curran. Thank you so much for joining us on this forum. What do we do? And you have been, since your election, and I can't say that enough, you have been a voice for all communities. You have been there when we were together to raise our voices for anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, racial hate crimes, Black lives. You have been there with us. You've been with the community. What can policies do to us? What concrete steps do we need to take? You're on.
Hello, Isma. Lovely to see you and lovely to see everyone on this call. I have so many things running through my mind, and I'm just trying to, focus on just a few. First of all, I don't think it is a secret, and I think we should all acknowledge that on Long Island, we do have a history of racism, the way we were settled, the way that some of the housing disparity that we've seen, the health disparity that we know we have, and that COVID-19 exposed even further. That's part of our history, and that's something I think we have to be not defensive about, but to acknowledge and to talk about, quite frankly. When you think about, housing edicts and laws that were maybe not quite legal, but happened anyway, we're still living this today. And I think about my kids who are in Baldwin schools, and it's not the norm. It's like the UN. You see every kind of kid there. Speaking of young people, this is something that I've seen through these past week and a half, is that it's the young people who are going to make the change. And I'm listening to people on this call, very enlightened people, smart people, and it's got to be the young people now that begin to take the reins and make the change that we know is going to happen, that we know it is inevitable. So when you ask the question about what can we do, people in government, we love to blather on and on. We can talk about this, we can talk about that, tell everyone how great everything is and what we're doing and what we're gonna do. But I think this is time now for us to take a deep breath and to listen with sincerity, not thinking about, okay, what does this mean for me? To listen with real sincerity, and then go back and look at what we have going on in county government, whatever jurisdiction you're in. What can we do to evolve? What can we do to move forward? And so looking at it, I guess it's past, present, future. What is the reality? What is the history? What is the past? Let's be frank about it. Let's look at where we are now, and then let's look to the future about what we can do to make things better for all communities. Health disparities, education disparities, housing disparities, employment disparities, all of these things we do have power over and we can do something about. So I think it's time for us to listen, and it's time for us to plan on how we move forward together. And I mean, it's a cliche, and I'm sorry, but I'm going to say it anyway. I said it before COVID. I said it during COVID. I'm saying it now. We really are one Nassau County. I know there are people who are entrenched and they don't quite see it that way. And there's a lot of defensiveness. But acknowledging that we are one Nassau County and that we do sink or swim together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Laura. And I can't thank you enough for your leadership. Thank you so much. I can't thank all of you enough for the support that you provide, for the perspective that you give to the communities, and how we have to. You're right, absolutely. We are in it together. We are going to swim, but we're going to swim to shore together, God willing. Keep all of us in your prayers, each one of you. We need prayers. We need concrete action. We need ethics and morality. It needs to come back in our policies, and this is the time to really reflect. We didn't have to lose a human life, a precious life. We have lost it, and from here on. Each one of us has a responsibility. Can't thank you enough, Father Greg, Rabbi White, Leslie, Pastor Tillery, and Mufti Farhan for joining us and for supporting the communities. We need more of this. Thank you so much, Moise and Bashir and Adrian and Javed for providing us with the support. We were initially a little shaky, but that's okay. We are human. Only God's presence is without a fault. So thank you so much again. Thank you, all of you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Sorry, I could not take all the questions, great questions, but I think our panelists did cover each and every topic that was individually asked in the chat room. So once again, thank you so much for your insight. Thank you for your support. God bless. Keep everyone in your prayers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tucker.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chowdhury, for moderating this so well.
Thank you.
Thanks to everyone.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you.